My name's Ben Prunty. I've had several positions around the university, ranging from upper level governance of the university, so the Board of Governors, University Senate, to as low as, or not low rather, but as I guess on the lower levels of student government in the departmental association, and even just grassroots organizing outside of that realm. I guess besides those university official titles, I'm a co-founder of the Concordia Food Coalition. I also co-founded the Hive Cafe, and I was on the executive of the Concordia Student Union for over 2 years, and for the second half of that I was the president of the union, and we had significant breakthroughs in the food organizing at that point. And prior to that I was a counselor, so a board member of the union for a few months, and I think significantly I was a strike organizer in 2012. Both at the school and around the city, doing just not really a major organizer, but very heavily involved all the same. And that's a factor because the team at the CSU that had a lot of breakthroughs was also composed of a lot of strike organizers, which is a little bit separate, but I think it's very relevant.
During the time that you're at Concordia, could you please describe the relationship with the multinational food corporations that you've witnessed around Concordia?
During my time there, or the history, or
Yeah, so like the history, but taking into consideration like the time that you were around, so like not necessarily before.
Okay, so you don't want me to talk about like how they've gone through all three of the food providers at this point?
Well, you could if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I guess I'll just start from the beginning. Prior to my arrival, and obviously a factor in the story, they had Sodhexo-Marriot as their food provider, and this kind of represents the beginning of the cycle of cycling through the different multinationals. As students become frustrated at one, they cycle into the next one. They get frustrated at that one, they cycle into the next one. So originally they had Sodhexo-Marriot, which was before my time, and then while I was at the university, they had Chartwells. Which is another multinational food provider that extracts profits from essentially Concordia and other institutions that it's a part of, and then those profits go to their shareholders. And so there was widespread dissatisfaction there, which manifested itself in a number of ways, not the least of which a nonprofit called the Concordia Food Coalition was created with widespread support, so students had to vote to create this thing, which is indicative of dissatisfaction. And then, there's a number of other ways or things that we could point to show the dissatisfaction, but the nonprofit being one of the major ones. And then after they had another contract that came up in the last year, or rather an RFP, a request for proposal. The contract ended, and then now they have Aramark, so they've gone through the cycle of all of the multinationals that are essentially out there. They're the big three. And ideally after there's been dissatisfaction against the first one and now the second one, and we can anticipate that many of the issues will not be resolved with this next provider as well. Namely, local governance is not a part of this. It doesn't really make a lot of sense that we would be outsourcing, I guess, our food system, and that's one of the main even from a university perspective, it doesn't even make sense, because on the corporate level, they want to differentiate themselves from other universities and other institutions and things like this, so that they stand out on the globalized market. So even there, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyways, once we get through that, ideally a community-run food provider would take its place, and we're hoping that the Hive will be that thing. So I guess I didn't really talk too much about the food providers themselves, but I think that's, you think it's sufficient? Or?
Sure. Great. Now I'm actually interested also in the history of the student-run food groups, and I know you've been a part of creating a lot of these groups, so from your own experience, I'm actually interested in the history of, maybe let's start with the Hive Cafe. Do you think you could describe the history of the Hive Cafe for us?
Yeah, the Hive was one of those projects that the CSU was never really able to get off the ground for whatever reason. There was, it's difficult for the CSU to really do anything major like that because there's always turnover, and starting a cafe can be quite challenging. So you'll have one year that's really gung-ho, and then the next one comes in and they don't fully understand what's going on because maybe they were, the opposing team that ran the elections or whatever. But for whatever reason, the CSU wasn't capable of getting it off the ground. So I was on the CSU for 2 years, and that was specifically, even when I ran for the board of the CSU, it was to kind of like, I ran on a mandate to essentially kick out the corporate provider in the student space because the opportunity costs don't really make a lot of sense. Sure, we might make a bit of rent by giving it to a third party, but we don't have the community value that's there. We don't have the governance control. We can't support the local economy in the same way by deciding directly who we purchase off of, and we can't kind of curtail the market ethos of the organization by, you know, taking a slightly higher price from somebody so that the money stays in the community. Because it's not, I think the corporate approach is very linear. It's obviously straight for profit. Anyways, so the Hive, you know, the Hive is now occupying that space where the Java U used to be, but the original Hive project was at Loyola campus. And we got kind of lucky to get the downtown location as well. It was always in our crosshairs, but it was kind of challenging, or, you know, nothing was really clear until it was. So anyways, we came in and we worked on it right away as soon as we got into office, I guess you could say. Myself and the VP Loyola, her name's Crystal Harrison. She was working on the construction side of things, and I was kind of working on the political side of things, like building momentum. I also did fundraising. And it kind of came into existence in a very political way, you could say. There was a lack of, I mean, at Loyola there was a real issue that we were resolving. There's a lack of food, lack of quality food. It's kind of like what a lot of people refer to as a food desert. So there was like a lot of appeal there and a lot of political momentum behind getting something going there finally. And the first year that we were in office, we had really tangible gains. Like the construction plans were well underway. And then when I was running for the president with my team, I had fundraised about $70,000 with the help of other people, of course. And so we had a very tangible, like, it's not completed yet, but we've done these things and this tangible thing. And so that really gave us, I guess, a bit of an advantage when we were running to take over the union as a whole, I guess you could say, the next year. Well, at least on the executive side of things, because our team was running against, like, I was a former executive and we were running against another executive. So we were running against each other. So, but students voted for us because we had a clear vision, which was to create the Hive on both campuses. And this was, of course, supported by referendums and petitions and the creation of the Concordia Food Coalition, and which I was deeply involved in. And the other team kind of seemed as though they were putting a bunch of like sticks in our wheels. You know, of course, they would never say that that's what they were doing, but it certainly seemed as though that's what was happening. And so that's how it was seen by I can imagine that's how it was seen by the student body. Obviously, I can't read their mind, but we got elected and we really won in a landslide. And it really was it was a food campaign that we ran on, so, and a community campaign, but a food campaign. And then it was just a bunch of hard work. We have profs that are supporting it. We had one prof who had been on the board since the beginning, and now he's gone. We have another professor that's on the board, which is really important for the continuity. We've had our first year of operations now, and had 2,300 members in the first two months, which is a really good sign, I think. It shows that there's a lot of community support, and a cooperative model relies on this. And yeah, and it's actually pretty astonishing that students wanted to pay $5 just to be able to shop at like this cafe, but also they could have a say in governance and things like that. But because it's such a young cafe, it's difficult to involve the members as much as we'd like to, but there still seems to be general support, which is really hopeful. And we're at the point now where we're trying to move our cooking in-house so that we can reduce our costs and then increase our revenues and all this stuff. So that we're always, and we're always kind of looking to the 5 to 7 year plan, which is of course to be capable of taking on the rest of the university's food service contract. Because, I mean, you know, they're not going to hand it over to just anyone, so we need to be a well-run machine, but we also need to be a very vibrant community space. And so, yeah, we're balancing those things right now. Now it's a work in progress.
So could you recount in the similar fashion you did before, now the history of the CFC and how it's become what it is today?
Yeah, the CFC started literally by a meeting that was called, and the Professor Satoshi Akita was kind of like facilitating a discussion, and then that broke out into different groups, and eventually one of those groups became very consistent and continuously organized, and then that turned into what eventually became the CFC, the Concordia Food Coalition, and that was a direct response to the contract, the food system contract. I'm pointing over there because that's actually where the cafeteria is, but I mean, that's how it came to be. It was a response to the contract, and then the mission. I mean, I can talk a little bit more about like how it got its mandate and its specific mandate right now, because it came into existence in response to the contract. But then, when we realized that there were limitations to students in the community being able to take it on, and the university was in no position to kind of restructure themselves, and in my opinion, it's not really ideal for the university to take it on anyways. I really think the community should, from the bottom up through the grassroots, should take it on. And so this is, anyways, so as the CFC was like meeting, and they would meet like every week for like 3 hours a week, and there was always progress, and like lots of people were coming and momentum. We got the university administrators' attention. We had a representative from the Board of Governors who was originally around. But we quickly realized that the contract was maybe inaccessible to us at the time. Some members of the CFC still tried to put a consortium bid together to take it over, but other parts of it, and myself, I was one of these other parts, focused on creating an alternative locally so that we could take it on ourselves at the community level. And that was, so we had like a multi-pronged approach. And yeah, I mean, it's not just about the service provider. It's provider either. It's also about the production aspect of things, and the CFC really built off of the foundations that already existed before it. So there's like a really vibrant food community. The greenhouse was getting off the ground and becoming more professionalized, not professionalized, but just more very well run, more situated. The People's Potato had been around for about 10 years. Sustainable Concordia was a support role. The Sustainability Action Fund. We had numerous student organizations that were peripherally working on these kinds of things anyways, and so there was an obvious foundation for us to build off of, a foundation of support and organization on the student level, which is of course thanks to the fee levy system that exists in Quebec. But I mean, yeah, so the CFC, it's kind of funny because it's a coalition, but it's it's a group of people that build community support and organizations to eventually transfer the food system as a whole to being community run and more sustainably run. Yeah.
Great. So in a similar fashion, I'm interested in the history of the Transitions Conference, how that came about, and maybe some of the purpose as to why this was organized.
Yeah, so the Transitions Conference, it was kind of, I guess you could say the concept was somewhat of my baby, and I was the first spearheader of it, I guess. And I came up with the idea roughly at another conference actually in the US at the New Economics Institute called Reroute. And that was filled with stimulating ideas and things like that. And then, eventually I had a group of interns that were supporting the conference, and that was through Professor Satoshi Akita's class again. And then we kind of got together and we had a meeting, and we tried to operate as horizontally as possible. And so I presented the idea, and then we kind of like reformulated it, and it turns out that like the idea ended up being very, very, very similar to what it was originally. And then with the help of a really actually excellent like internship team, who actually eventually won an award from the university for their role in organizing the conference, it was able to get off the ground really successfully. And the way that it worked is the process of organizing it and marketing it and things like that was a part of the wider campaign. And so there was lots of outreach that was done, and people would give class presentations, and there was a lot of excitement that was mounting. And the purpose of the conference was to position very exciting projects that people almost wouldn't believe exist next to projects that are happening in our own community. And then to kind of present much larger, grander projects that could be happening here, to kind of like show that these other things that we thought maybe weren't possible, are very similar to what we maybe think is not possible here, which is to take over the food service contract and to build a greenhouse and all this other stuff. But also not only that, and so that's like the educational component that came with the conference, and kind of the pushing people outside of their normal box, which kind of says that you can't just do like you can't accomplish. You have to kind of follow the beaten trail. You know, I guess we were trying to invoke more of an entrepreneurial spirit, but at Concordia in particular, and there was a fixation on hyper-local action. So at Concordia, because that's where we have the most agency, and at universities we have a remarkable amount of agency, I would say, at least in Quebec. But the other component that's also essential to it is that those people, those that are, you know, we're invoking an entrepreneurial spirit, or that's the intention. Those people that kind of attend the conference, and because it's about Concordia in particular, start to think about how they can change the university and what roles they can play. And so people, you know, would take on responsibility, I guess you could say, and you know, some projects directly came out of the conference in NDG. There's a group that said that they were partially inspired by the conference. A number of like the people who organized it, some of the interns, eventually moved to take on other positions in other university bodies, like not the Sustainability Action Fund, but the Sustainable Concordia. Sustainable Concordia, to name one. And a number of them are now, some of them have positions on the executive of the CSU. Other ones have taken on other leadership roles within student government and things like this. And so when people have, I guess they're kind of, from that, there came people in a bunch of different positions that had very similar ideas as to what could happen within the university's food system. And so I think that really helped to propel it forward. Because when the conversations were happening at different bodies, there were people who already knew a good deal about these things, and so that would propel the conversation forward, and then they would take on natural leadership roles in those areas. And I think it just ended up supporting the project overall, and that's really what it was supposed to do. Because in a university setting, we need to remember that turnover is like the main variable, I guess, or not the main, one of the main variables, because students turn over like crazy. So we need to, we need these mechanisms to re-educate people and to inspire people to become involved again. And so it's an annual conference about hyper-local action. And yeah, I would say it served its purpose, and I think it continues to. And hopefully there'll be a third next year.
The next thing I was interested in is what kind of a role has the CSU played in the development of these student-run food groups?
The CSU played an extremely important role, I would say. Not only just structurally in Quebec, it's a bit of an anomaly. There aren't as many like kind of centralized student organizations like there is at Concordia. So structurally, the CSU existing created I guess you could say, the conditions to allow for all of the different fee levy groups to exist, which includes Sustainable Concordia, the People's Potato, Sustainability Action Fund, all of these groups and the greenhouse that contributed to the creation of the CFC eventually, and the CFC itself was reliant on the structure of the CSU to fund itself, because every student puts in a few cents, and then all of a sudden you've got enough money to make things happen in the long term. And I was talking about turnover being an issue, and the fee levy groups allow for turnover to be answered to a certain extent. So as a structure in and of itself that allows for fees to be levied, extremely important. And then as an organization, I mean, I was the VP Sustainability when I was working on the project. The VP of Sustainability before I got the position also was around for the beginning of the Concordia Food Coalition. So right there we had a full-time staff person essentially that had the liberty to support different sustainability and food projects, and so we supported in that way. And then because we're actually a very large student union, we had staff that could work on other aspects of it, from business plan writing, just to, like networking, we have like the campaigns coordinator essentially worked directly with both the Hive and the CFC as well. So we had another like full-time staff person right there, not including the executives that worked on the projects. But then, I mean, we also build momentum within the university because we appoint representatives, and then we're on the board of governors, and so we can, through the CSU, we really have access to, well, primarily we have access to the upper levels of the university. But if you're a good, not good, but if you're a connected union representative, which you pretty much have to be, because if you're going to win an election, you need to be connected to the base a little bit more in the grassroots organizations. Then, so I guess we have access to all of the different levels, which is really important, because we can take what's being said in the grassroots, and then we're involved as well, in the formation of the discourse and things like that with the people in the grassroots. And then we bring that to the Board of Governors, we bring it to the upper level administrators when we're meeting with them, and we make sure that the university conditions are right for the development of a student-run food system. So we make sure, for example, that if students are prepared, that the university is going to allow them to take on spots that are within the contract. And we lobby hard for this. And we don't really take the approach like that, you know, oh, thank you so much for graciously allowing us to take on space within our own community where we exist. It's really kind of that if it's possible, it's a moral obligation of the university to allow us to do this, to allow the community to essentially organize itself. And that approach seems to be generally understood by them. I think that we're lucky to have the right person in the Vice President Services position right now, which deals with these kinds of things. Besides that, you know, the CSU provides a good deal of money. We funded the construction involved in the Hive. In total, you know, well over $500,000 has gone into this so far, and we anticipate that another, even maybe more than $2 million, maybe more, will go into the overall food campaign. From additional construction that might be needed for a kitchen so that the Hive is able to produce more food in-house so that it can compete with the other food providers, to the creation of a greenhouse, which is being worked on right now. I actually just got out of a meeting about the greenhouse. It's very exciting also. And that's going to, you know, that'll probably cost students about $1.5 million, but we anticipate the overall project cost for that to be maybe closer to $5 million. So, but the $1.5 million grant that hopefully the CSU will be able to provide in the future, and this is a part of what we're able to do with such a large student organization, is it will encourage other funders to put in money as well, including the university. So I guess primarily there's advocacy, there is funding, and then there's a lot of institutional memory too, and mobilization. I would say that, but without the CSU, I really think that we wouldn't have been able to accomplish everything that we've been able to, because also, I mean, through my time as the president, as the sustainability person, we gave space away to the groups, the student groups, essentially for free. Space that we used to charge rent to the third party, which I'm considering to be an opportunity cost that's unacceptable. We gave to the Hive for free so that they wouldn't have to worry about rent. And of course, we don't have to pay rent on space either, because we exist within a public institution, which is publicly funded. So, and we don't seek revenues from community groups like the Hive. So, yeah, we provide a lot of infrastructural support and access to professionals too, because it's incredibly expensive to start a cafe, from legal fees, construction costs, consulting fees, and things like that. And we also have a full-time accountant and a general manager, which makes us well positioned to support these groups in their early years of their foundation building, which is really important too, I think, for an organization like the CSU. Because we're so big and kind of detached, it's good for us to support these organizations. So hopefully going forward, it will continue to play the same role. And I guess one final thing that we've done at the CSU is we actually created a policy which allowed for, I drafted this policy which allows for any student group to apply for funding, and it can be a large amount of funding it doesn't even matter what point of the project they're at. If they don't even have a business plan, if they just have an idea and they want more information, like they want to do market research or something, like we would fund that market research if it's a good project. And if it's like creating a new or expanding an existing food service or food system project, or if it needs, you know, like the greenhouse will need $1.5 million, if it's something that we have a mandate to support, and we do have a mandate to support the greenhouse, then that policy allows for funding to be, or it creates a framework for funding to go to that project. And that it kind of sends a message to all those other groups, like the People's Potato and all those other ones, that hey, the CSU is supporting the expansion of the community-run food system. So if you have ideas, you know, maybe we can make them realizable. And you know, you combine everything together, from the conference to the creation of a new organization, the Hive, to the Concordia Food Coalition, to the already vibrant foundations, and you've got a really great, I guess, base from which we can really take over the food system eventually, within a cooperative model, of course. But anyways, the CSU, yeah, absolutely integral. Yeah. That's it.
Great.
Yeah.
the next question I wanted you to answer is, what do you think the role of multinational corporations, what should be the role within public institutions like Concordia and universities and hospitals, other things like that?
I'm going to restrict it to food because then I can make blanket generalizations. I don't think they have any place in public institutions. Specifically in universities and on the student level, I think that we can take a lot of inspiration from Norway's model, which they have student welfare organizations, which are essentially our student unions, and they have a monopoly on the food providers in the universities and bookstores, but that's a side point. But they have a monopoly on the food providers. They're all non-for-profit, and they're student-run majoritarily, and that's across the board for all of Norway. And for me, from a state level, that seems like streamlining, where they're making use of their public institutions and the captive audiences that are there, and the fact that their citizens, the people that pay for the state to exist, pretty much need to be eating food whenever they're in this setting. So they're not using it as an opportunity for somebody else's profit. It's literally, they use their foundations, which we should be using, to reduce the cost to the individual as much as possible. And since there's control over the food system, then if there are issues, then students can go directly to the student welfare organization and say, hey, we have this issue, you should change this. So I think that model in universities makes perfect sense. And similarly, I don't see why, it seems like structural laziness to contract out to some random third-party multinational when we could just be running them ourselves. And economies of scale, if we want to talk economies of scale, combine the hospitals with the unfortunate reality of prisons and the universities and the other public institutions, and we've got economies of scale right there just waiting to be organized more effectively. But the government, anyways, is doing different things, I suppose. So I guess we have to do it ourselves. And the beauty about the cooperative model is that it can be exported. It can act like a franchise, so to speak. And it can be, it can be locally run wherever it is. And the cooperatives could still build a network and develop economies of scale within that economic model as well. So, I don't think that the multinational organizations have any place whatsoever in the food systems within public institutions at all.
What do you think would be an ideal food system at Concordia?
It's difficult to answer. I'm not an expert in every area, but I think the importance is that it's very heavily embedded in the community, both of the university, but also in the community, like its regional community, and it supports the economic development as well as the health, and it's just kind of a holistic approach to making sure that we're making the most use of, like, I don't want to say resources, but like the resources at our disposal, which are the captive audience, the fact that we all need food, ideally, they would be working in public benefit, specifically, rather than private profit. The ideal food system is, I guess one thing that I haven't mentioned throughout this interview is the importance of it being democratic, really. Like the word democratic hasn't been used, but, as long as it's democratic and it answers to the needs of the community directly without having to go through all the hoops and all of the effort it takes to show some for-profit provider that there's enough dissatisfaction that it will become slightly less profitable, so they better change their behavior. If we can have a little bit more integrity in our systems to allow for changes to happen, because of ethical and moral reasons and things like this, rather than purely economic, or at least, anyways, the economics are important, but they shouldn't be the only thing. But so I guess democratic, as local as possible, reducing waste as much as possible, supporting vulnerable parts of the community through employment programs would be very nice. Having curriculum components would be helpful, and then always keeping in mind that our success here can be copied somewhere else, and so really taking the time to make every part of it intentional, and creating the framework for improvements as it moves forward all the time. So. It's really difficult to say what an ideal food system would be, because I don't think it's up to any one particular person, but I think inclusive, democratic. Some people would probably say healthy, but I think there's also room for comfort foods alongside health and things like that, so I don't think it should be imposing. and yeah, embedded in the community, like I had said. Yeah.
Great. One last question. I was actually wondering if you were to give future students advice if they wanted to become food activists, what would you tell them?
Start anywhere. I would say definitely start anywhere. Don't get in your own way. Don't listen to people who would be naysayers. So people who are calling. Well, yeah, I would say, pick who you take your advice from. There will be people who just don't dream or don't think big at all. But then there's also the people who you really should listen to when they have criticism. So I guess choose who you take advice from, and just keep on pushing ahead. Yeah.
Great. Is there anything that you want to add that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. Maybe that there's a good deal of no, I won't say that. I'm going to keep the word anti-capitalism out of this.